writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business, coming to you from Kobo's headquarters in Toronto.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Chrissy, and on today's episode, I got to interview Stewart Bache, who is a true professional book cover designer. He actually has his own design company called Books Covered, which is absolutely worth checking out.
And you may have seen his covers from authors' works such as Mark Dawson, Serena Clark, Adam Croft, Neil Gaiman. He has also created covers for Stephen King.
Yeah, he has a really interesting story. Actually, it's quite a nice parallel to the indie authors we've often spoken with on this podcast, where he started at a traditional publishing house and then he eventually moved out and started his own shop. So he himself is an independent business owner and brings that perspective to the work that he does for many independent authors now. So we get into all kinds of topics, including Stewart debunking my often said advice on this very podcast that you should not be designing your own covers. So if you want to hear the answer to why you potentially could consider doing that and what tools you need to do it, and lots of other amazing insights about cover design, stay tuned. Thank you so much for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. I'm Chrissy, and today I'm talking to Stewart Bache, who is abroad. You are in the UK, correct?
That's correct. Hi, Chrissy.
And you have caught my attention for quite a while because I know you design covers for authors including Mark Dawson, and I know you've done a course for him. You spoke with Joanna Penn last year, and I loved that interview. And most recently, you were the designer of Indie Author Mindset by Adam Croft, which actually won our Cover of the Year contest for last year. So we're talking to the true pro here, so I'm honored to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm honoured. I am honoured. It's great to chat to you. I've been looking forward to this interview.
Awesome. So as some background, you and I actually have a bit of a similar trajectory because I think I started in trad publishing around the same time as you, about a decade ago. And we've both now moved over to the self-publishing side. So I'd like to get into that a bit. So what made you initially start to want to work on the cover design business on the traditional side when you originally were designing?
Well, I worked in branding originally, so I worked in a couple of branding places in London in my early 20s, and I was never really entirely happy with what I was working on or the sort of direction I was going. And a junior position opened up with Hodder and Stoughton in the UK, in London. And so I took a pay cut and sort of applied for the job, and I got it. And it was very different. So it was really hard work, and I had to think differently to how I was. You know, I thought I would be very similar because I worked in branding, and you're looking at sort of branding authors and things. But actually, there's a completely different process in design. But also, the thing that I loved about it, and that's the reason why I stuck with it for so long and still do it now, is that I'm designing one thing. You know, I designed several concepts, but I'm designing one thing for the book. Rather than, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages within and doing massive documents to talk about the branding and all that kind of thing that I used to do, this was just sort of focusing on how people buy and what they buy and what they like and what works and what doesn't, and doing shoots and all those sorts of things. So it's a really fascinating area of design, and so that's what brought me into it. That's what kind of was, you know, that's why I'm still here, still doing it.
Amazing. What made you make the switch to go out on your own? I believe you were designing for Mark Dawson already on the trad side?
Well, I was a freelancer for a little while, so
okay.
I worked in trad for about 4 or 5 years, and then I went freelance for a couple of years during the recession in the UK. So I became a freelancer, and that's when I met Mark and started designing covers for him. And then when I went back in-house, I went back in and worked for HarperCollins. Probably shouldn't be saying this, but on the side, I did some of Mark's stuff as well whilst I was still working in-house. So because we've always remained in contact. So yeah. And obviously I still design his stuff now as well.
Yeah. So that leaves about 5 years between then and now, I believe. And
freelancing is running a business, but now, you've got your business name, you've got a course with Mark Dawson. What does your business really look like today?
It's interesting because at first it was almost just a way of sort of legitimizing my freelance, rather than just being I'm a freelancer. I really wanted to kind of make it feel like it was more than that, and I could expand on it someday. But it pretty much expanded instantly. Around the same time, Mark brought out his first course, which was advertising for authors, and I became a bonus on that. As work with me, you can get like a percentage off for that kind of thing on your covers and your marketing and all that kind of thing. And it we didn't really look back. We didn't really have time to breathe, actually. I think we just sort of booked up, and we went from being like a couple of weeks ahead of schedule, for our schedule. It was a couple of weeks you could book us in, but now we're actually at the moment we're almost 12 months.
Wow.
Ahead of time, so which is hard, and it's hard to let people down and stuff, but it's amazing for us, and we still haven't ever asked for one project from anyone. We've just continued. But what's been really good is that over the last couple of years, the difference is, as you've mentioned, is that we've created our own book cover design course. So when I say we, I mean myself and my wife, who's the director here. She's an editor as well. And we designed that, and I wrote a book, and we're doing all sorts of different things. We've got a new thing this year, so we're expanding into stock imagery, our own stock imagery, which nothing's happened with it yet, but there's a lot of things being sort of talked about, and lots of emails going back and forth, and lots of Skype conversations with some fantastic photographer that I've just recently met. So yeah, that's another thing that we're looking at. But we've really it's changed a lot. In the last 2 years especially, it's changed a lot.
Mm-hmm,
so
it's exciting. Could you just explain what stockumentary is? I don't know.
Oh, yes, sorry. So stock images, stock photography. So you've probably heard of people like Shutterstock and Getty Images, people like that. So when you go to those sites, you're looking for a photograph or an illustration, usually of a figure, if it's a thriller, figure running, or backgrounds, that kind of thing. And for book covers, you tend to look for one of two things. You either look for a figure or a background. Right. And you combine them yourself, and that's what you're searching Shutterstock for. But the thing is that you're limited. So you're limited to how many actual models you can get, and you often will see the same running figure on book covers, because there's only so many that are actually any good to buy or to use from Shutterstock. So we're kind of looking into that area of expanding that and making it very specific for book covers.
Very smart, and thanks for delving into that a little bit for me.
That's okay.
So I wanted to kind of just expand a bit on that shift from traditional to indie, because you and Mark kind of made that move at the same time as me, apparently, across the world from each other. So when you think about the traditional approach to cover design, basically the author hands in their manuscript, editorial team and marketing team kind of say, okay, we'll take it from here. We'll send you the finished copies when they're done. There are plenty of examples of great results where, there's amazing experts in-house and deliver something really incredible. But then there are some examples, especially in genre fiction, but, across the board, I guess, where the cover doesn't really resonate with the book, and then if it fails, that failure is attributed to the author and the book itself, right? One big indie example is Bella Andre, who was one of the pioneers in independent publishing, especially for romance authors, who famously got her backlist back and switched the cover to a pink cover because of I don't remember if it was some researcher, fans told her that they preferred that, and immediately skyrocketed to bestseller status after not being able to achieve that. So now you see authors really making the choice to self-publish based on the fact that they can control their cover specifically, among a lot of other reasons, of course. And to swap to the other side of things, now we see authors starting from cover design and writing off of that, right? You get the cover concept first, and that's your first foot out the door, because it is so crucial, especially in a digital e-commerce world. So from your perspective, making that change, can you talk about the difference of receiving a cover brief from an editorial or marketing team versus now when you get it directly from the writer. And I can imagine some tensions, but I don't know what obviously your working relationships are like, but like delivering a cover or getting feedback directly from the writer, it's so important, crucially important to them. That was a super long-winded intro, but hopefully you followed me.
It's really, really interesting question, because I don't think I've ever been asked that. And it is very, very interesting because, yeah, obviously there are differences, working in-house when I was an art director at One World, or when I was working at HarperCollins, you rarely ever met the author, and the only time that you ever came across any of their work was, if you were lucky enough to get a manuscript, because we often work 12 months in advance, so sometimes there wasn't a book. Or you might have a blurb, and things do change as well, so characters change and when they look and everything. So anyway, it's rare that I ever got a chance, unless it was like maybe a Christmas party or something like that, and I might say, oh, by the way, hi, I did your cover, and that was quite, because you might not be allowed to actually talk to the authors in some cases. But yes, no, the difference is that I actually really enjoy it, because the directness of it is really refreshing. Speaking to someone who knows intimately, all of their characters and the storyline, and can offer you things straight away about whether something is right or wrong, is amazing. Obviously, it can be a little bit more difficult in some cases, because I'm used to a process that is based on traditional publishing. And so I'm used to looking at the market when I design, and looking at sales and see what works and what doesn't work. And not every author I've worked with has worked in traditional publishing, so they don't know those aspects. So it can be a bit of a learning curve, not necessarily steep, but it can be a learning curve. But I've learned to be able to express myself in the right way, I hope, anyway, and tell an author the way that I would like to be briefed. And actually, I found over the last 3 years, or 4 or 5 years, actually, the way it's worked for me is that I've simplified it. So literally, a brief for me, all I need is a synopsis, basically a blurb, because that's how a reader will come to it. Will pick it up, and that's what they'll read. So for me, that's as much information as I need, really. Because if that's what your potential reader is going to read, then that's what all I should know as well. They don't know the inside of the book. They don't know the characters or the storyline. And then when it comes to characters, I like to know general information. I don't need to know how their hair sits on their head, or what clothes. I like to know sort of what clothes they wear, but I don't need to know specifics. So just general outline of characters and plot and scenes and places, that kind of thing. But what's really important, and I found this helps the most with briefing authors, is asking for comparative book cover visuals. And I never use them to copy ever, but it gives me an idea, because I'm a designer. I think with visuals all the time. So by saying to someone, please show me how, if you went into a bookshop and you were looking for, or you were online or whatever, and you were looking for a book that would be perfect for your a cover that would be perfect for your book, what would that be? And also, what's working in your genre right now, and what's sort of working with your competitors and all that sort of thing, because then I can see it and I can think, well, okay, this is where it's going to be fitting, and also this is what you like. I'm getting an idea of what you like as well, and I think that's important. I always will say, for me, it's always about selling your book. So I understand when you have personal tastes and stuff, but for me, it's about getting your book to the right people who are going to buy it, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what you want people to do. You want people to buy your book to read it, and so I'll do my best to try and make it fit in the right market. Now, some people want their books to stand out, and I think obviously you want your book to stand out. It makes sense, but actually, from a design perspective, standing out isn't always the best way.
Right.
And actually fitting in can be so much more beneficial to your book than you could ever imagine. And I'm not saying just sort of slide in and disappear. I mean, if you think about it from a billboard, when you're driving down the road and you see a billboard, you have seconds to get an idea of what that's about. Because if it's going into too much detail, or the images are too flashy or whatever, it could stand out a mile. But unless you get it straight away, you don't know what it is. So, and that's the same with a book. When you walk into a bookshop, You want to know what the genre is, you want to know who the author is, and you want to get a flavour of what the book's about. Things, genres do change and styles do change, and some are glacial, like with pace, with their design styles, but some, especially things like women's fiction, romance, literary fiction, they change all the time. What the tastes are, they change all the time. So it's not about sticking to a design style that will be that way forever. It's about sort of seeing what works, and as you would when you walked into a shop to buy your detergent or whatever, that they don't go out of their way to do something that's completely different. You want to know that what you're getting is a detergent, and you don't want to spend 10 minutes looking at the different design styles and wondering whether it's actually right for your clothes or not. You just want to know instantly if it's detergent or not.
Right. I think there's a lot of great advice in there, and I think there is a truth to that idea of you have to know the rules before you break them, kind of, to fit in as much as you can, especially when you're on the earlier side of your career, before you can do something radically different when you have the name and platform to have whatever cover you want because your name is
Stephen King. Pretty much, it doesn't matter, so
yeah. To that point, you design across genres to great success, great thrillers and nonfiction as well. Do you limit in general what genres that you design for, or are there any genres that you wouldn't design for?
When I was starting out, when I was a junior, I did an awful lot of dog books. I was desperate back then to limit as many of them as possible because I did probably about 100 in a year, one year, because they were so popular. Misery memoirs were another. There's only so many sad children that you can put on a. But as a business owner, as a designer, as a freelancer, I'll design anything and everything. Just my personal tastes and my tolerance for certain genres, like dog books and misery memoirs, might be short, but actually I'll pretty much design anything and everything. But I have been known in the past for being like the action thriller or the espionage book cover designer. Obviously Mark and I did John le Carré and people like that. So, and Adam Croft, I do a lot of psychological thrillers, that kind of thing as well. So I guess I'm probably more known for that than I am for any other things. But I have done quite a bit of romance and literary stuff as well. Lionel Schreider here in the UK, I used to design her books. Yeah, it's interesting. I used to love doing literary books because I could be completely free in some respect. However, the one thing that's really, I've kind of changed I haven't changed my mind, I still love doing them, but the one thing I really enjoy now is sort of more contemporary fiction, like action thriller, as I say, and psychological thriller, because they're so fascinating and they're so popular as well, that you see them everywhere. And there's a sort of way, I don't know what it is, but with literary fiction it's great. But I remember seeing an interview with Robert Downey Jr. and he had just finished doing the first Iron Man movie, and I remember being interviewed and he said, I'm really happy now that I've finally done something that's made some money and that's doing well. And that's kind of how I felt when I started doing more commercial fiction. Like seeing my books, well, not my books, but the covers like on shelves and doing well in bestsellers lists and all that kind of stuff I was so happy. And like I say, I lived in literary fiction, but they don't quite sell as well sometimes as other things. And I also realised when I started doing more commercial fiction that there is a little bit of a snobbery around things like literary fiction and what is good design and what is a good book. And I think they kind of go hand in hand, that area, a little bit. So actually I have an appreciation for commercial fiction and non-fiction now because there's so much work involved, and there are designers in-house all over and freelancers all over the world who work really, really hard to try and figure out how to make the next bestseller, and how to make the next, Ice Twins or the next Lee Child or whatever it is. They're working really hard to try and make those work and sell in their thousands. And there's, and I think people think, it's commercial fiction, it's really easy and they've just spent like 20 minutes on it. But actually the amount of meetings that you have to go through and the amount of time it takes to get it right, I think probably there's more thought put into them than any literary novel that I've ever worked on.
I believe that, and I think it partially gets back to your original point of trying to fit in while standing out. That's a really tricky balance. With literary, you have a super obscure image, or border, the font can be your true focus, but with thriller, there's no messing around. Every single component and the color has to all work so well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there is an often repeated rule, and we've said it on this show many times, so guilty as charged, but to not design your own covers, to leave it to the experts. But you really break that down piece by piece in your course for the self-publishing formula, and in your book as well. So why are you handing the reins over to authors to try to take a crack at?
Well, I'm tired now, so I can't do everything now. I'm joking. No, it's obviously working with lots of self-published authors. I've seen how they work and how hard they work, and how there are aspects that you have to turn your hand to that you wouldn't as a traditional published author. There are things that you have to do as a self-published author that you can't always afford to do. And there are areas that you should be putting your money towards. And I do think a good book cover helps, because what's the point in having a fantastic book and having it edited and everything, and then having a really poor cover on the front? It is the face of your book at the end of the day. There is a limit to your people's budgets, especially when they're starting out. And I think there are so many people who are like, okay, well, I'm just going to do my own cover because I can't afford to get anyone to do it. So I thought, well, at least if they could understand some of the rules. Now, then it's never going to take the place of a pro ever. And I've come into a bit of flack over the last couple of years with people saying, "Oh, you're trying to take work out of pros' hands," which is not the case at all, because that's I'm a pro. I'm not trying to get people.
It sounds like you still have plenty of business.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're booked a year in advance, you're not cutting into your own bottom line there.
Well, exactly. And I've worked with a lot of authors, and I still there are some people who take my course who are my clients who do some of their own covers, and then I do some of their more sort of, I've done a series of their covers before, and then they've gone, well, I can't really afford to use you again for a little bit until these do well. And so I've taken your course and I've put a few things together. What do you think? And what's been great is that some people have taken the course and now have an appreciation for what goes into it, and have said, do you know what? Yeah, I understand now. And because I talk about briefing and how to brief your designer, where to find them, all of those things. So, I don't just say, forget them, like this is how you do it. I talk about the importance of it and how hard it can be. But then I will go through and I'll sort of say, well, these are the sorts of things that work in thriller. This is kind of how I would put a cover together with this sort of brief. And I do the same for a number of genres. And it's really helped, I think, a lot of authors who, like I say, I've had a lot of work put into their book, and now they have a fairly decent book cover, and they don't always keep it. They make a bit of money from their book, and then they'll get a professional to do it. Mm-hmm. But for me, working with a lot of people who are fantastic authors are now able to get a little bit more money out of their book, because they've managed to understand a little bit of the process of what goes into the book cover. And a big part of it is basically do your research. What's working in your genre right now? Okay, those are the sorts of fonts, those are the sorts of images. How do I picture research that? And, some of our students have done fantastically well, and some of them have actually become designers in their own right, have had their own clients now, and are working with members of the SPF community and all sorts of things like that. So that's fantastic. And some of them have designed their initial series and are now doing well with their books, and then have either come to me or gone to someone else and have had, for their next series, some pros design them as well. So, it is a rule. I do think for the most part, you should get a pro to do your stuff for you. I wouldn't recommend just learning a quick editorial course and then editing your own book.
Right.
Because you might not be able, it takes time and it's money and all those sorts of things. But at the same time, it is something that you can learn on a basic level to get you so far on a budget. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. Well said.
I probably won't change many people's minds on that, but it's something that I think is important.
I would say you changed mine insofar as you took the approach of,
if you want to put out your best foot out the door, then this is your starting point. You cannot just do it in Microsoft Paint and hope for the best, because you're never going to get out of this kind of cycle of, I can't afford a cover designer, so I have to make my own. It's a learning process, and potentially a give and take on the budget side, and a constantly evolving process. I think that's really key to what you said there of balancing what you're trying to achieve with the money you have on tap to achieve those goals.
Okay, well, good.
So on the budget side of the spectrum, there's lots of services out there that offer kind of cheap cover designs, or tools like Canva, where you can try to get some design. Are there other ones that you've seen that you would recommend that authors check out if they're trying to learn their hand?
Yeah, so Canva is quite basic, but it's good in that respect. So I think a lot of people can come to it, and it's limited in its scope, but it has some great images on there. And once again, if you follow the rules of your genre, then you can come up with something quite basic but effective, I think. There are some others that I haven't actually used. I think there's one called GIMP, GIMP. That's free to use. It's not dissimilar to Photoshop. And there's one called Affinity, which a lot of people on my course use, to the point where I've thought, well, I think I need to look into it and maybe learn a little bit about it, because so many people use it. And it's not free, but it's very similar to Photoshop, and you buy it one-off and you've got it for life. And whereas I think that a lot of people, if you're only just going to design a few covers and some marketing stuff, paying this subscription, which is what Photoshop is, is kind of hard. I know you can get Photoshop for $10 a month, which is good, considering that most people have to pay 50 plus a month. But yes, it's still a lot of money if you're on a budget. So yeah, Canva's great. I don't really know many more online design software or applications. I know GIMP, or I think it's called GIMP. I'm hoping it is, because
we'll fact check you on
yes,
it.
please. And Affinity, Affinity Photo, I believe it's called.
Okay.
I might be wrong on that, but a lot of my students use that, and they think it's amazing. It does many things that Photoshop does.
Awesome. So we often think about books that we love to read, but I was wondering if there are some book covers that are not your own design that are your go-to in your mind for like the epitome of a really amazing cover?
Oh, right. God, that's good. There used to be a site called Book Cover Archive when I was a junior that I would just pore over those covers, and most of them were literary, but they were beautiful and really clever ideas. The 1984 books, especially the Penguin editions, they've done several, and there are some fantastic ideas, which I guess when you've already got when 1984 is already very, very well known, so you can do whatever you want with it, really. But recently, I'm trying to think actually, because we buy books all the time, and we're one of those people, those couples who buy, and when we've got a 16-month-old baby, so we don't have much time to read, but we still buy a lot of books. I'm looking at my shelf now because obviously I've completely forgotten. I tell you what, I really enjoyed them. I really like the covers, well, pretty much any cover that are on Neil Gaiman books, especially recently, the last couple of years. They've been very, very different. I can't remember the name of the title now. It's something, The Pond at the End of the Road, or I can't remember what it's called now. I love Neil Gaiman, but obviously I'm not very good at remembering his titles of his books. And any of the sort of American Gods type stuff that used to, Anansi Boys and that kind of thing. They've been stuck in my mind. It's the sort of thing I like to write as well as to read. So it's that sort of area. I tell you what, it's the thing that's always stuck in my mind, and it was the first book I was ever bought as a teenager, and that was the Colour of Magic by Pratchett. And so, I mean, his books have managed to keep a style throughout, always illustrated, pretty much by the same person, I think. But they are iconic in my mind about what book cover is. And there was I designed Stephen King a few years ago, but there's a series by Jamie Keenan who designed a series that were very, very just simple, strong color with a simple illustration on them. And they were fantastic as well. They were like the sort of books that I would go out and buy. And once another area, my wife worked with was on the Tolkien estate team. So the original Lord of the Rings covers, we have some of those, and they're absolutely stunning. Those are the iconic ones that sort of come into my mind when I think about the sort of covers I love and I like.
I like that. That's great. I find it interesting, and I wonder if you do the same. I imagine you do, but the experience of scanning for TV shows and movies these days now is almost even more so cover driven than books, because if you're looking through Netflix, you truly get like cover, title. And what I find interesting is Netflix is A/B testing covers, and they'll swap out covers if one seems to be underperforming, or I don't know how intricate they're getting on the back end, but maybe it's just they're trying to hit me again with a new cover.
Yeah.
Do you see the world of books ever heading in that direction, or do you hope it does, where somebody could A/B test a cover design? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
I've got mixed emotions. I think I love stuff like that because I find that we pretty much only watch Netflix now, and yes, I've noticed that as well. I have looked into it a little bit, and I think that if it can be based on what the things you watch as well. So they'll show you a cover based on, or a thumbnail based on what that's similar to the things you like, or maybe even a character or something that they might think. I've seen things where the character isn't even one of the main characters, and I've thought I've actually stopped because maybe it's an actor I like, and they must know that. I don't know. Maybe they don't know that. Anyway, that's not the question you asked. Yeah, maybe. People do that already. Indie authors are already starting to do that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Sales teams used to do it with some books, some big books, when I worked in traditional publishing. And they would take 2 or 3 covers and blow them up and then ask people's opinions. And then they would go one direction or another, or maybe sort of what I used to call Frankenstein them and sort of like mix the best of everything, which doesn't always work. But I do get that sometimes, and more often now, authors will say, I've shown all your concepts to my AR team, and this is the one that they really like. And I think it's really interesting. Well, I don't know if you know this, but I've been writing myself, and I've been thinking, well, I think I might do that, because actually people seem to like it. People in IAR teams and on indie author communities and stuff, they seem to actually quite like getting involved. My only issue from a design perspective and as a book cover designer is that's not how people shop. Mm-hmm. So you don't go into a bookshop and think, what do I think of this cover? Should I buy the book? You see the cover and it either makes you want to pick it up because you recognize something in it, or it grabs your attention, and then you read the blurb. And it's almost always the blurb that sells the book. As a cover designer, as much as I want people to say it's the cover that sold it, I know for a fact it's the blurb or a recommendation. So, I always say, take the opinions of a pinch of salt, because when a person looks at a cover and says, what do I think about this? That is not how they're going to buy that book. And so they will see things that they would never have seen. They might even see things that they would never have seen, and that book's been sitting on their shelf for 10 years, because you look at it differently. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how I feel about it. I don't think it's science. Right. I think it could really work as a marketing tool for your book and for your readers and getting them involved, but I'm not entirely certain that it works from a... Okay, so I brought out a book last year, the Author's Guide to Book Cover Design, and I originally showed a few covers to people, and they all liked a different one, completely different one. And I just thought, but that's not what's working well in the market at the moment. So I'm going to go for the one that I think will work better. So, I don't know. I think for me, it's always about research. It's always about what's working and what's not working. So, and then at the end of the day, it can be just down to gut. It's not science, as I say.
Yeah, I think it's science insofar as it's psychology, consumer psychology, right? It's not a science. And I think you're right that it's an unscientific data set if you're polling a highly engaged readership or a community of authors who are engaged in a super different way than your casual carousel scroller.
Of course, yeah. It's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah. So, last question. Are there any new trends that you're seeing in cover design that you're kind of excited about, or you're like, finally, this this kind of font is in, or this kind of design is out?
Well, a big thing last year was the blue. I think everything's blending a little bit more now between America and the UK, or sort of European and worldwide sort of thing. So America tended, or have in the past, had very different covers from the rest of the world. Just the way that publishing works, I think. But actually, since it's partly to do with indie, it's also to do with things like online buying things from Kobo, etc., that things are starting to mix a little bit more. Anyway, at the end of last year, there was a huge amount of blue psychological thriller covers with either yellow type or orange type or something like that. Almost always blue, and that happened before, like 3 or 4 years ago. It was the same. And there's always something. There's always a color and there's always a theme, and it's usually with the bestseller, like the woman at the window or something similar. That was blue cover, yellow window, yellow type. That's sort of disappearing now. That's already starting to go out. I've noticed. I still work for some traditional publishers, and I've noted that they've gone, okay, no, we need to move away from this now because it really is becoming saturated. So that's sort of moving out. But there's a new trend that I've noticed recently. I was in bookshop on the weekend, and I sort of stopped, and I think my daughter must think I'm crazy, or people must think I'm crazy in the shop anyway, because I'll actually talk to her and I'll pick them up off the shelf and I'm like, look at this, look like how this is different. So a lot of crime and psychological thrillers and even action thrillers this year, I think, are starting to go for a one blanket color, so maybe a really strong orange for the entire cover, with then like a very simple illustration on it. So some fairly big type, which always seems to be quite big. It has been big for the last 10 years or so. And then I can't remember the name of the book, which is awful, but there is one in the UK here, I think it's by HarperCollins, and they have a sort of a stag's skull illustration with the antlers going into the type, but the book itself is just this strong yellow. And then I looked down and there was another cover that was, I think it was called The Lost. And it's about people after an atomic bomb goes off in Washington, and they're all staying in a hotel somewhere, and they can't get out. There's like 20 of them, and there's a murder mystery kind of thing. But anyway, once again, bold, strong, orange cover with a simple illustration on it. And I've noticed that's starting to pop up, and I think that's something that will be picking up this year.
Okay, interesting. I'll keep my eye out. Oh, and I said that was the last question, but I just, when you started mentioning bold colors, I felt that I had to ask you this as a designer / fellow book buyer. How do you feel about people who sort their libraries by color of cover?
Do you know what? I used to do that. So how do I feel about them? I feel that they've probably got a little bit more time on their hands than they could be doing something else with in their lives. I think I was very bored in those days when I spent that much time color coordinating my library. But now we just kind of just put them on the shelf.
Wherever there's space.
Usually by the bed, just in a pile. But I think if you can do it and it looks great, that's great. But you should be maybe writing or
actually reading the books.
Or reading them, maybe, yeah.
That could be a good one. For me, it's a bit of a red flag. I don't know why. Something about like the inner librarian in me. I'm like, how do you find anything? Why is the fiction and the nonfiction next to each other? I don't get it. I'm very much like fiction sorted by last name. There's one way to do it. I can't sympathize.
Well, I think maybe it's also a case of liking to show people that you read rather than actually
be. Exactly. I'm with you. So if you can prove otherwise, I'll take it, and your design choices in all aspects of life are yours. All right. Any last words of wisdom that we haven't covered yet? And if not, then just tell our listeners where they can find more information about you, please.
Well, I'm on Twitter, Stuart Bache. So it's StuartBache. I have my own portfolio website, which is stuartbache.co.uk. My business is bookscovered.co.uk. And my book is The Author's Guide to Cover Design, if you fancy understanding the process behind book covers or want to turn your hand to it. And also there's a course with Self-Publishing Formula, which is the cover design course. And you can find that on their site as well. Unfortunately, I don't remember that one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's a link somewhere.
I think it's the first Google hit that I got, at least, so easy to find.
Cool. People say about judging books by their covers, and I think if they didn't, then I'd be out of a job. And it is incredibly important. And I'd say the biggest bit of advice I have, if you're an author who you're doing it yourself or you have a pro doing it, that it's not about narrative. Your book cover isn't about trying to impart your story. It's about trying to connect with the reader to buy the book in the first place. So, let go of how your character walks or what their moustache looks like or how their hair fringe goes across their forehead or whatever, or any of those things, or if that isn't the specific alleyway that a person's walking down. Let go of all of those things. And narrative is important, but it's not as important as the design. And that the design should be making a person want to buy the book and understand what the genre is, who you are, and what the title is. It's that's the sort of process, really. So it's either the first thing it should be, what genre is this? And then you've got person straight away.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all of this wisdom and info about your own story. It's great, and I'm excited to share this with our listeners. Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah, my pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So we hope you enjoyed our interview with Stuart, and make sure to check back next week because we will have an interview with Meredith Wild.
Whoa, superstar. You do not want to miss that episode. And if you love podcasts from Kobo, and you're listening, so you obviously do, there's actually a new podcast out of Big Kobo, let's say. We kind of sit within Kobo as Kobo Writing Life. It's called Kobo in Conversation, where there are even more conversations with authors about why they write their books, and it's available anywhere you want to listen to your podcast. So that's definitely worth checking out.
We'll have a link on our blog if you're interested, and just chats about authors' books and getting deeper into the stories they've created.
Books. That's what we're all about. Thanks as always for listening and for working with Kobo Writing Life. We love hearing your ideas for what you might want to hear on this podcast. So you can always contact us at writinglife@kobo.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we provide insights and stories from leaders and experimenters in the world of self-publishing.
If you want even more information about growing your Kobo sales, check out our blog or find us on social.
And if you're just finding us and ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!